Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a very different episode of The Say Report. I'm your host, Devin Degger, and joining me, as always, my host companion and current poobah of Brendan Fraser is Sejan Sarwick. How you doing, Sejan?
Hey, I don't think it's going to be as different as you are making it sound like it's going to be, but...
No, it's just, this is an episode, okay, as much as The Say Report is a show about everything, and that distinction is going to be important a bit later on. I correct me if I'm wrong, Sejan. Have we ever done an educational episode of this show?
I mean, I like to think that we've talked about things that would educate people, but what do you mean? What?
Well, this one is specifically meant to educate, right? As we explain what's going to be happening with the Say Report, unfortunately for the foreseeable, which is the saddest part of it.
Yeah, I also take issue with the fact that we are not experts on any of this. So, like, we're only interpreting this subject matter as we... Why are we being coy about this?
Well, I don't...
With everything going on with the strike, there are new rules this week about what podcasts should and shouldn't do. And it's not that we are in any position where we have to abide by certain rules, but we feel the need to definitely partake in a couple of small ways.
Yeah, well, I mean, you say we're not in any position where we have to abide. We did reach out to SAG-AFTRA for clarification, and we did get a response that did ask us if we feel comfortable, then we could do it as a show of solidarity. Like, before, it was like our decision. But then once they actually take the time to write us an email...
I feel like they made it pretty clear it was still our decision, but go ahead.
Well, they made it clear that it's our decision. But that said, I mean, I'd rather make the decide...
Let me put it this way. There is nobody associated with this program in any way that has a contract over their head that is being fucked with by anybody from either side. This is entirely a divorced project from anything that could be affected by the strike. But we have decided that we wanted to do our part.
Yes. That was actually the perfect way to put it. I don't know, Sejan. I'm weirdly nervous about this. I obviously, we've talked about the SAG-AFTRA and WGA strike and what that means and what's going on in Hollywood. We haven't shied away from it, but I was not prepared to read the FAQ for podcasters up on the SAG-AFTRA website and be like, oh, well, that kind of is what we do.
Well, yeah, kind of, except the big part of it is that we make no money from this. You'll notice that there are no ads, that we make no product placement. We don't have merch. We don't have, we're not trying to get you to a Patreon. We are in no way financially gaining, so those rules really have nothing to do with us.
We're also not members of the union, which is the other part of it, because there's the fact of, like, if
we'd be getting paid.
Yeah, exactly. I'd have to pay you, Sejan. Well, you'd have to pay me? I don't know. We've never looked at the financials and the legality of this show. Maybe that's the thing we'll do. I don't know. It's just, yeah. So this is it. This episode, we're going to go through the FAQ that was sent out for podcasters, and what it says and how to interpret it. So if you're a podcaster who happens to listen to our podcast, welcome. But also just to discuss it and why we came to the decision that we came to. But also, like I said, we're a show about everything. So having our hands, well, not tied, but like shying away from topics because we've been told that would be a show of solidarity, that's not hard for us because we have so many other topics that we can explore unrelated to those two. So do you have the FAQ up, Sejan, or am I going to be doing all the reading over here?
Oh, I can pull it up. I didn't even know there was an FAQ to look up. I just know what they said about what they wanted podcasters to do, and basically it was don't talk about movies and TV. And so I said, okay. I didn't know that there was like much more to it we were gonna have to get into.
So I guess I'd like to go through the thing since it's going to be affecting the show briefly, but it's also the bigger effect that it's going to have is on the Adam Sandler Cinematic Universe podcast because that is going on hiatus. Yeah. And it has to, and you'll understand a little bit better once we go through the FAQ, and then I have no problem sharing the response that we received when we asked for clarification to make sure where we stood based on the topic of our podcasts. So to start on the FAQ for podcasts, The first frequently asked question is, can I still work as a podcaster or appear on podcasts during the TV/theatrical strike? And the answer is yes. You can continue to work on most podcasts during the strike, but there are some rules you need to keep in mind.
Yeah, the other thing to remember about this FAQ is it is for SAG-AFTRA people.
Right.
So this is talking to actors asking, or not anybody that is associated with SAG. I don't know if it's just, I don't know if SAG just actors. I guess technically they do just cover just actors. Right?
Well, that's the Screen Actors Guild, and then it's the AFTRA part that I think handles other things.
That's where I was getting caught.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So this idea that yes, you can. Again, we don't work in this industry, so this isn't really a question directed at us. But
right. But it is. But it's a question that they're asking, and it's an interesting one because, the big reason why they're on strike is because there are people. The one that I saw over the weekend is that Sean William Scott, for playing a role in a film that we've done a couple of very special episodes on, was only paid $8,000. It's such a $35,000. He got $35,000 for the role that most of you know Sean William Scott for, and that movie would go on to make $235 million. So it's not surprising when we talk about those films that he didn't want to come back, and that it took a lot of money to get him back on set.
Mm-hmm.
This is
what
cool.
What does this have to do with podcast and theatrical strikes?
Well, if you're striking and you don't have income coming in, maybe you think I'm going to go on podcasts.
Right. Yeah. So that's one of the big things that I think is key here is that there's a lot of people that are doing rewatch podcasts and return podcasts and revisiting things post their big show, right? And if you're on a podcast that is rewatching those old shows, and you're in a position to, you monetize that. And so for some people, this is their kind of gig right now, right? This is their thing. And that idea that if I don't do this, then I'm not bringing in a paycheck. Is it okay if I continue to do my show? And this is the response to that is you can, but you have to keep some stuff in mind. I imagine that there's probably a sliding scale. There's probably some shows in this realm that are just not going to work with the ways that the strike rules play out, but maybe some people can figure out some ways to still make it work, still pitch their stuff. I wasn't kidding about we don't do things like Patreons and merch, but there are plenty because that's how a lot of podcasters make their ducat, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a lot out there right now that without being able to talk about their subject matter, they can't even push stuff like that. How do you tell somebody, go to my Patreon, I'm not going to produce for the next 2 months?
Right. So before we go too much further down that one, we should discuss that term of struck work. And that's touched on in the second frequently asked question for this, which is what kind of podcast work is not allowed during the strike? So for guests, appearing as a guest in any podcast to promote struck work is not allowed under any circumstances. This includes promotion of work you did in the past. Remember, past work is just as important to the streamer's bottom lines as upcoming work. Streaming services are putting performers' work on their platforms to exist there forever, without letting the performers share in the revenue they are receiving as a result of having an endless supply of content that performers like you made possible. So that's right there. It's you can be you on a podcast, but don't promote anything, which is a really interesting scale to it. Because I think for some of these people, the reason why a podcast would have you on as a guest would be to discuss the work that you've done. Here, I'm going to put it out here early. If anybody wants to come on the SAG-AFTRA and just have a conversation that is completely removed from your body of work, we would welcome that. As we've always said, what does Kevin Bacon want to talk about at a dinner party?
Yeah. Yeah, but it also means that if you're the type of celebrity where you do, we'll take Gwyneth Paltrow just because she's an easy example everybody can recognize. She does a lot of work that is not just her acting, her whole Goop stuff, her whole health thing, right? And in that, she has a lot of things like a mental health podcast and stuff like that. So by that account, she could currently continue to do something like that because it doesn't have anything to do with any work. Now, you can argue just by the mere presence of having somebody on there, you are kind of doing that, but at some point you have to figure out they're drawing lines between the personal and the professional.
Yes. Which is why, if you're a host of a podcast, if you're under contract, you should honor your contract. If you self-produce your podcast, do not promote struck work, past, current, or upcoming, as part of your podcast. If you're unsure whether your podcast is affected by this rule, please reach out to us at podcastcontracts@sagaftra.org, which is that's the other big thing. That's sort of like, that's not us. That's not the Say Report that's talking about. That's Zach Braff and Donald Faison doing a rewatch show of a show that they were both on.
Yeah.
And like that. That's the characters, like some of the background actors in that popular workplace sitcom on the Peacock Network doing their rewatch. That they shouldn't be doing that.
I'm going to sit here and just take a shot every time you try and explain a thing without saying a thing.
It's so much fun. It's like, I swear on this show. I mean, fuck it. I have no fucking problem saying swears. I mean, I'm a cunt and asshole. But when I'm at work, I try not to. And what this has now done has basically unlocked another level of difficulty where in addition to like not swearing, there's also don't use these things. The other crazy thing is, and I think it's going to make me a better linguist, which is a crazy thing for somebody who hosts a podcast that's like creeping up on their 350th episode. It's only 9 away after this one, guys. I don't want to make references to any television or films. And there are times where I exclusively will communicate in media quotes. So, I mean, I guess I just have to handle the facts that has to stop. But yeah, but that's another interesting part of it. I really respect, talking about this one, that if you are under contract, honor your contract, because it's a different sort of thing there. To say you're contracted to do this show, it's weird because it's not those contracts. I know that SAG-AFTRA has podcast contracts, but I don't feel like that's what they're talking about there.
No, they're probably getting around to the point that like those contracts may have been signed outside of the realm of, our coverage.
Yeah.
Which means a lot of things in terms of like so like if I'm an actor striking a movie right now and the movie's not getting worked on, but because I signed onto that contract under SAG, I have access to SAG support. Literally, like they can be sending me money to buy my groceries and stuff like that. If I work a contract that is not under SAG support and then I strike because of something SAG says, the SAG is under no like
obligation to help
or ability to help me. In a lot of ways, they can't. They literally can't help me. Like there's so that's probably what they're getting at in those regards. Is like if you're on a contract of any kind that we are not a part of, then continue with that because we can't help you there, bud. But no, it's good looking out.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. It's smart. And the thing that I have learned from all of this, and one of the reasons why we're discussing it right now, is this is like a really smart approach. It's not that I ever thought that the actors were in poor hands with Fran Drescher as the president of their union, or based on everything that I've seen, but like this is a definitive thing that I have understanding of, where I am saying good looking out for the members of your union.
Mm-hmm.
Like, all right. Which will bring us to question number 3, and we've touched on this already. What about rewatch or companion podcasts relating to struck work? Are they considered promotional? And the answer is yes, they are considered promotional. Rewatching companion shows drive people to the struck company's platforms to watch the shows promoted by your podcast. We must stand together to show those companies our power and influence so they will provide performers with a fair contract. You should honor any pre-existing contracts, but if a contract is not involved, don't promote struck work. Hosting guests can talk about their personal lives or union activism or how the strike is affecting them or the state of the industry, but not about work for struck employers. Which is also really cool. Like, I totally get them being like, hey, don't do your rewatch podcast because you're basically doing free advertising for the company that's already being like, we're going to make money off the back of your work and not pay you residuals.
Right.
Because streaming was never part of your contracts. Which is, on one level, just kind of gross. Like, it's just such an example of how the corporate world works. Like, we'll start calling it fizzy bizzles. And we never said you had to pay you on fizzy bizzle profits. And as crazy as that sounds, that's how it works.
It's weird that there was no obligation for renegotiation when this sort of shit started to happen, right? And I think that like it really struck me, you know, when we first kind of started to learn about this, when some of the bigger actors with some of the bigger companies were like, during COVID, and we're like, my movie was supposed to come out in theaters and it didn't, and I was promised more money on that, and the companies were like, too bad, right? And I think then is when it really kind of clicked for all of us, like, oh, there were a lot of people that were not prepared for this new world of entertainment that we're in, huh? And this is, I think, more of that. Is I just cannot believe there was no obligation for them to go back to the table and say, we are going to start showing this work in a different way than we've ever done it before, and we need to know how that works with you. They just basically were like, no contract exists, we're going to abuse that.
And honestly, that's part of what the strike in 2007 was about. It was about writers wanting to make sure that they were still going to be compensated for their work as streaming became a brand new form of content consumption.
Right.
And it's weird that, like, that's still part of what they're dealing with. But then on top of that, it is the fact of AI replacing, well, what it looks like is everybody. Right? With the reports that have come out of, they've been scanning our faces and our bodies, and we're like, oh, I wonder what that's for.
Yeah, I mean, the other side of that is we've also been getting more and more reports over the last couple of months about the major problems still existing within AI that people are just pretending aren't there. Apparently, some AIs have started correcting themselves, like, mid-responses, and so, like, people are getting back, like, you know, paragraphs long responses from AI, and halfway through it starts like changing its answer, and it's just like, okay. It's almost as if like you were talking to someone, and as you were talking they started to realize where their mistakes were, so they started to kind of like, you know, correct themselves and work with you, and that's fine when you're in conversation with another human. The problem is that when it's AI just spitting out a wall of text at you, like you're basically immediately shown the like, well, if that was so wrong, then the rest of this could just be bullshit too, couldn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I work in academia, I will say that. And currently we are dealing with a student who wrote an essay using ChatGPT. Like, that's a big thing that is being discussed on campus, and what that means going forward. Because it's sort of the first one that's happened at my little college. And it's interesting because that was done in like the early days of ChatGPT when it was writing, well, there was an episode of a television show that was proud to say, we let ChatGPT write part of this episode to show just how poorly it can do that.
Yeah.
Like, it was.
Yeah.
So now where we are, like, the whole AI thing, that's the scariest thing about it. How quickly it has changed in just 2 months. Like,
yeah, I mean, the thing is like ChatGPT and stuff like that, they've existed. I mean, we're coming up on year marks for a lot of the publicly available versions of them, and more than that for some of the beta versions. It's just the ways in which that the world has kind of caught on. And you know, there's multiple reasons for that, but it doesn't help that a bunch of people started using it for mundane tasks like writing papers for school or putting together cover letters for resumes. You know, people aren't out there trying to write the next American novel with this thing anymore. They're just putting together like a grocery list. And it's like, yeah, like, and so in that it becomes much more, it becomes much more present because we're using it all the time, not just for special projects.
Yeah, it's the difference between using basic arithmetic, which is what a calculator is great for, and solving high-level calculus equations. Does that make sense? I feel like that makes sense. We were asking the AI to write novels. which was like, solve this calculus equation. And it couldn't do that. But it could tell you what 2 plus 2 is. Even if sometimes it tells you it's 5 and then tells you you're wrong if you say, well, that's not what 2 plus 2 equals. Are you sure? Are you sure? I don't know. It's a thing that's happening. Which brings us, let's go to the next question on here, frequently asked. Why does SAG-AFTRA care if podcasts promote struck work? SAG-AFTRA fully appreciates the importance and reach of the work you do in the podcast space, which is why we need you to stand with us to stop promoting work that benefits the companies we are on strike against. Gains in the TV theatrical contracts set the standard for all other contracts in the industry. We must all work together to win a fair contract as quickly as possible. That makes sense to me. Like, because here's where it is. Here's the first time that I have to ask this question. If they don't want actors promoting that work, why haven't they asked the viewers to not watch things on streaming? Right? Like that wouldn't that seem like the next logical step? Because what they're saying is any money that they get tells them that they don't really need us.
Yeah, I mean, but this, I think, comes down to a lot of the Hollywood marketing stuff, though, because remember that a large part of budgets that we don't ever hear about and get used, bandied about, and basically abused are things like marketing, right?
Yeah.
So right now, there's an entire budget that we are not even talking about. We're looking at, oh, this movie came out and only made this much money. This movie, that none of that's ignoring the fact that, like, they're also currently probably paid for a lot of stuff to be set up for promoting movies like Oppenheimer, like Barbie, right? There are movies that are currently out there that people are not out there promoting that I'm sure a lot of money already went into the promotion of. That is burnt cash. So, like, and that's kind of where we're at on this, is like we're talking about the difference between like cash coming in and cash that they're just throwing out the damn window. And I think that's where the difference is. And, you have to decide for yourself, like, if you still want to participate in that game. But they have currently not asked people to stop watching things. They have currently not asked people to stop going to things because because the work is done and they want the work to be seen. I don't know if that's going to be the case in a couple of months when the work that's out there is no longer their work, right? Mm-hmm. And at that point, they may ask people to stop. I think it's just a matter of time before we see that. But I think there is a difference right now between like the money that's already been spent and the work that's already been done versus bringing in like new money that is not necessarily guaranteed or planned on.
Right. I guess it also kind of talks to, it's sort of an unpaid endorsement. Like, it's one thing if I tell people to go watch a show, but if the star of the show, or even somebody who appeared in that show in, like, a semi-regular capacity, is talking about the show, that is an endorsement, and it is advertising, and it is completely, like, free advertising that is driving an audience to that product.
Yeah. It's just it's the idea that we don't want to be giving it to them for free, like paying for movies to be out there, paying for actors to be in movies and stuff like that. They have paid that cash. Money has changed hands. The contracts, while they might not have been very fair, were agreed upon, and they're done. But moving forward, that's not necessarily going to be always the case, and we're going to have to take a look at that. So I'm fully prepared in like mid-August, late August, to start hearing talk about how certain people are probably going to start asking us to not participate in A, B, or C. And if this thing continues long after that, we may see full-on calls from the union to just not go to the movies.
Right. But that is not what's happening now. This is just, this is their first attempt to try to stop that and stop that bandying in terms of rewatch companion type podcasts. And it's a good first blow against striking over the bow, right? Like, it's like a warning shot right here. And they get to see how that affects it. All right. So then, I have a rewatch or companion podcast relating to struck work, but I am under a pre-existing contract. How can I show my solidarity with the SAG-AFTRA strike? We understand that you must honor your pre-existing contractual obligations. If your contract or influence allows you the flexibility to adjust your show's content for the duration of the strike so that it no longer is promotional of struck work, SAG-AFTRA and your listeners would see that as an incredible show of solidarity with the performers on the shows your podcast typically promotes. I mean, this is the big one for why we're doing what we're doing, even outside of the response that we got when we contacted for more information. We are a show about everything. So it's pretty easy for us to say we're not going to talk about television and movies. And actually, I think it'll be more interesting, too, to have to dive into video games. And I know some of our listeners don't like when we cover video games, so I do apologize for that. But also things like music and books and politics and everything else. That is everything. But that, like, because of our own natural predilection to the media of television and the cinema, we tend to, you know, gravitate more towards. Right? I don't...
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is also the reason why doing the show like the Adam Sandler Cinematic Universe podcast, I mean, we're still working on that one. An episode is not due out for that for 2 weeks. But considering the fact that it's basically watch a movie, tell people if they should or shouldn't watch that movie, and how it relates to his other body of work, that is, I don't know how we modify that show. Like,
no, that's it. That's a prime example of the kind of show that's not going to be able to continue. Yeah.
Excellent. So then, here's a fun part. If I'm approached by a producer about hosting a rewatch companion or entertainment-focused podcast, can I accept the work? Members should not accept any new contracts to host a show that promotes struck work while the union is on strike. That one's very self-explanatory. But I understand why people, again, a lot of these people are on strike because they're not making enough money to live. So then when you're on strike, you don't get paid. I know that might be a crazy thing, but it's a thing that people should understand, that, like, you're not working, you're not collecting your paycheck. So it is very, like, some of these people might be desperate to, like, take a job. And it makes sense to, like, no. They're not going to subvert and still be able to, milk your status while you're on strike and just circumvent SAG-AFTRA. Makes sense. Yeah. So then here we go. What if my rewatch review or companion podcast is covered by a SAG-AFTRA podcast agreement? SAG-AFTRA podcast agreements are not covered by the strike order. You're free to continue hosting your podcast that is signed by one of our agreements. But if you're able to pivot your show away from the promotion of struck work, we strongly encourage you to do so. We are all in this fight together. The same rule barring promotion of struck work applies to any guests that you may have on your show. Which, I mean, that's just sort of the earlier part about guests and hosts, sort of, you know, reworded, but also talking about those SAG-AFTRA contracts that we mentioned earlier. The contracts that they're talking about in this FAQ are not those SAG-AFTRA podcast agreements, where it extends the protections of being a member of that union to the work that you're doing on the podcast. Is different types of contracts. It is Johnny Slick, the Hollywood bigwig, coming to you and saying, you know, we really liked you on that show with the 4 old ladies living together. We'd like you to talk about that show episode by episode. You don't take that. Johnny Slick, Hollywood bigwig might be my new favorite character.
I think also part of that is that if you're in an amateur position where you've been doing this for a while and you start to be in a position to get, you know, promoted efforts, because there are plenty of rewatch podcasts and revisits and all that where they get big enough. They start very much in their humble origins, right, much like our show here, but then if they get big enough, they do actually end up gaining enough traction to actually be approached by these kinds of people. And I could very easily see right now, as other shows are going on strike, that there are probably some people out there like sniffing around to see if there's anything that they can pick up, that they can put some money behind to keep kind of the ball rolling in that regard. You know, and I don't know. Like, as somebody that is not associated with this in any way, like, it's easy for me to say I wouldn't take that money because I would wag my finger at it. But like, if I was a fan of a show for so long, like, and then suddenly the company that produced that show came at me and was like, "Hey, we're running a little thin right now on content. Mind if we pay you some extra money and maybe send a couple of people your way that don't mind bending some strike rules, and we'll get your work better promoted on, more years and stuff like that." Like, it could be real tempting for those amateur groups out there.
Right. Which is then brings us to the next question of how does all of this apply to me if I'm a non-union podcaster? This
What's
is
the
the
worst they
big
could
one.
do to me? That's the
Yeah.
question.
What is going to happen if I do this? And it's an important distinction, and it's also one of the reasons why we're doing what we're doing. Any non-member seeking future membership in SAG-AFTRA who performs covered work or services for a struck company during the strike will not be admitted into membership in SAG-AFTRA. See strike notice and order. And it's a link to go see that. But basically, what they can do is they can deny you access into the union. And now, some people might be thinking, well, why would I want to be a member of the union? They've stopped working all this time. Well, but because they're stopped working, the union is the one who is taking care of its members. Like Sejan said, they're paying for groceries. They're helping out with stipends and things like that. So being a member of the union, that's an important thing. And in the Hollywood before the strike, if you weren't a member of the acting union, because of these television and theatrical agreements that are the big focus of a lot of this struck work issue, you would not be legally allowed to work on those productions. If you're not a SAG member, if you don't have your SAG card, if you're non-union, which they'd love, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the nuts and bolts answer. I mean, there is also a larger answer that they clearly can't put in a document like this, but like, because it's the right thing to do. It's the other part of that. Like, how does this apply to me if I'm a non-union podcaster? Please participate in these rules as well, because it's the right thing to do. It's like the other answer to that. But in terms of the legalese of it all, like, the big thing that they can do is they can say to you, we'll just make sure that you can't ever do real work in this town. I mean, like, because if you're non-union now and you cross the line, like, you'll never be union. That's just never going to be an option for you. And I imagine by the time they get out of this mess that they should be in a better position than they were before, and that's going to be real disappointing to anybody that's no longer allowed near them.
Yeah, I agree. It's crazy. And also, what a weird thing too, because like when they shut down a factory and you have scab worker come in, right? Like, they're getting paid better money than those people who are on strike, right? They don't have any of the protections of the union, but like they're saying the work needs to get done so this corporation can still continue. Does that happen in Hollywood? Like, is that the reason why the directors nailed down their stuff so quickly? Like, are there going to be scabbing actors? How do you,
I mean,
like, what?
we already see non-union work get done all the time. I mean, it's never huge, it's never big or promoted, right? It's not the big companies that are usually doing that kind of work. Everything from independent, like, artsy films that I see out here at Sundance to some of the more questionable religious ones that you will see, like, from time to time, that also seem to come from out here. It just comes from the Mormons instead of the artists. But there is work that is produced non-union, right? And the thing is that we never see that work as any of these larger, never promoted as well as any of these larger movies are, never given the screen time at cinemas that these larger movies are. Like, it's not unheard of, but the idea that Hollywood could depend on that kind of filmmaking is untenable. Like, it could not depend on those kinds of films to, like, so they have to come to some agreement, because even in the example you gave about the idea of a factory worker and scabs crossing the line, the inevitable conclusion to those stories always is they can never find enough scabs to replace the entire workforce, and the scabs they do find are lower quality often than the striking workers, because the striking workers know the value of their own work, that kind of thing. There's so no company has ever been able to exist completely on scab labor, and Hollywood is not going to be any different than that. Now, that being said, there has been a lot of work over the years to create industries that just don't have unions, right to work states and stuff like that. And I do believe that we're going to see big attempts at that over the next few years from Hollywood, just because in response to this, we're going to see a couple of people try some things that are not necessarily union approved. And I'll be very curious to see, depending on the outcome of this strike and depending on where we're at and who tries what when, like exactly what is allowed and what's not. Because the unions in general, like even away from this strike of movies and television, just talking about the state of the concept of unions in the United States as it is right now is so up in the air right now, and it is something that people are finally paying attention to. It's been up in the air for decades, but it feels like more than ever this has become something that people want to finally get nailed down, figured out, right? And so we'll be talking about unions a lot in many different ways for the years to come. And this feels like this is just kind of the most publicly acknowledged one, visible one, to be fair, right now.
Yeah. I mean, before that, it was Starbucks and their whole attempt to get unionized. I think, 2 years ago that finally happened for them?
It's still an ongoing
and it's
thing.
still ongoing because it's location-wise. It's not every Starbucks is piloted is not the word, staffed by union positions. It is a few that have unionized their workforce. But again, like, a union is only as strong as its membership. And what we are currently watching with SAG-AFTRA is one of the largest unions go to bat for itself. So it's also kind of interesting. I mean, like, may you be cursed to live in interesting times. Like, COVID was an interesting time. This is another interesting time, but this is the one I'd buy the popcorn for. I'm very interested to see how this shakes out and the ripples it has through our workforce as we all maybe reevaluate our worth to the 1% of this country.
Well, a large sector of the tech industry is really focused on entertainment, and a large sector of the education industry is sadly focused on things like entertainment. Like, I say sadly because, like, I would never want two industries so intricately intertwined as you often see with this, but it's an unfortunate part of the human condition is, like, we all want to go to work during the day, but we also want to go and watch a movie when we come home at night, right? And so, like, we need both of those things to have balance in the world. And the fact of the matter is that we can't treat one like less than the other. And so, like, the ways, as you pointed out, a lot of the strikes and things that we've been talking about over the last few years have been places of work. We can't forget that this is a place of work for people, despite the fact that it is something that is just entertainment, quote unquote, to us. It is people's jobs.
Yeah, it's people's lives, too. Because without their job, they can't pay for their lives. And, and it's not the big people who are making $1 million an episode that it's talking about. We're talking about the people who are, like, guest stars, but, like, you might not know their name, but you see them in a bunch of things. You see them in a bunch of things because that's required for them to work in this industry and live a life.
Right.
Which brings us to the final question of the FAQ, which is pretty small, self-explanatory. Who do I contact for more information about podcasts? Again, please reach out to us with any questions at podcastcontracts@sagaftra.org. So again, if you're out there and you're not sure what you're doing, this is out there. All you got to do is sagaftrastrike.org/podcaster-FAQs, and you can read all of this information, and you can choose how you want to do, what you want to do with that. For the SAG-Report, we decided we're just not going to talk about anything TV or film related until the strike is over. Is it going to be a little difficult? Maybe. I love that stuff. It's how I pass my time. It is where I find a lot of joy from. I'm not going to stop watching it. I'm just going to stop talking about it on the show. And it'll be, I'm actually looking forward to it as an experiment to try to broaden my horizons and interests. I mean, personally, that's me. I can't speak for Sejan.
I don't think it's going to be that difficult. We've done full-on episodes where we haven't talked about movies and television before. We will just do those for a while. It really isn't going to be any different, I think, in the long run.
I agree. But, you as the listener, you should be aware that this is what's going to happen, and these are the reasons why. Which then I just want to do. This will be quick, and then we can move on to. I have some topic stuff that happened this week that is not related to this, and also there's a big thing that we touched on in our last very special episode. That well, for me, I finally have my answer to it, and we're going to start the process with you, the listener, for what that means. But before we start with this next part, please, this is a disclaimer from the bottom of the response we received when we contacted them at podcastcontracts at SAG-AFTRA.org. Please note, the information provided in this email is in response to a specific question or questions sent to podcastcontracts at SAG-AFTRA.org and should not be construed as general information for all situations. You can find answers to many frequently asked questions, the latest updates on the strike, and more information about how to get involved at https://www.sagaftrastrike.org. If you cannot find the information you're looking for, please email your question to podcastcontracts at sagaftra.org. And then here's from the response. This is cut down from it. Any TV show or film, past or current, that would have been covered by our TV/theatrical agreements is considered struck work, unless that project appears on our interim agreement list. Rewatch shows are promotional, and they can drive people to the struck company's platforms to watch the struck shows that are being promoted by your podcast. If you are comfortable holding off on producing while our members are on strike, that would be a wonderful show of solidarity. Here is a link for the podcast FAQ, which we just covered, which may be helpful if you have any further questions. Thanks for getting in touch and for your support. All the best, podcast team. So that right there, that response about it, more of the question that we're asking is, we were just going to do a very special episode that was all promotion for a film, right? And we wanted to know if that was okay. Technically, because it was produced before all of these guidelines were released on podcasting.
Also, I don't know if you could necessarily call half the comments we made
true. That's the other thing. Right, but but like hate watching is a thing. Undeniably.
Right. No, we've talked before about how that drives a lot more audiences than not, actually.
Yeah. So it was that thing like, is this okay to release? But because it was already produced work, we wouldn't be putting any more work into it. That one ultimately went up. You've probably listened to it. I can't tell you to go listen to it, even though I'm real proud of it, because it would be doing that. But, you know, you do what you do as you consume.
Yeah.
Yeah. Talking forward about that, what that really does mean, though, is that our other podcast, which is not the SAG-Report, which will definitely be continuing to do episodes, just avoiding the topics of any struck work, is Adam Sandler Cinematic Universe. And if you're someone who's here from that show, welcome. We're also going to do something over there so that people who only listen to us talk about one specific topic, as opposed to I guess right now, almost everything of the SAG-Report. They have some explanation as to why. So, I mean, that's it. I just wanted to, this has been a really interesting couple of days for me, going through all of this, seeing how podcasts are being affected by the strike. And I wanted to make sure that we addressed it on the show. But like this feels more like a lecture than the usual cool hangout chats that we do at the SayReport.
Yeah, the Winston Churchill fireside chats or whatever the fuck.
Yeah.
No, this is no. I mean, this is definitely more informative than we tend to ever be on this show, which says something about two guys that talk about so much bullshit. But I think that, you know, the larger thing is, in general, is as usual, as what we've been saying all along with this strike, is you've really got to decide for you the listener need to decide for yourself how you're going to participate in this. You know, I know some people that have sworn off just doing anything movie or film related, movie or television related, because it wasn't hard for them, to be honest, and that just kind of it kind of gave them an easy out. Now, if anybody ever wants to talk about this stuff, they can just say, like, no, I'm not right now because of the strike, and I just, you know, where I am right now, I didn't want to participate in it, period. Other people are feeling a little bit more struggle because they do want to be still involved in certain projects and things. I mean, to put it bluntly, I know people in the industry that are like, man, I really want to watch this thing because my whole team from the last project we worked on were involved in this, and like, I want to see their work. But like, do I bootleg it? Do I go? And it's all about how you've just got to figure out what you do for yourself. You know, as I mentioned, there's ways to go and see movies that are maybe in special formats or screenings that are more important to the artists that created them. Put you in a room with somebody doing a talk back or something like that, right? Like do that kind of stuff, because at least then your participation in the thing is an effort, right? And that's the big thing, is just make some effort to recognize where you fit into the system for this whole thing, and decide how much of an effort you then need to make to get on board with this. You know, if you're somebody that doesn't engage with the industry much and it's easy for you to cut off, do that. Like, just do that for yourself and for the industry right now. Like, just don't get involved. Or if you're somebody like us that is intimately involved with this industry but feel this kind of sense of responsibility because of that, I mean, you know, we're not doing this just because we want to someday be in SAG-AFTRA, right? As much as that's like really, as they've noted, the only big thing that they can really do if you do this kind of shit. This isn't some weird attempt to later in life get involved in SAG. In fact, I've gotten much closer to SAG than I care to admit in my past life, and I don't necessarily know if that's a direction I ever want to go in again. Not because of SAG, but because of just the whole entertainment industry as a whole. But this idea that like we are so tied to this kind of work that it would feel really disingenuous of us to not do something. And if this is what they're saying is the thing to do, then we're happy to do it.
Right. And anything else that comes down the line, we will approach it just as we have with this, and then ultimately make our decision. If it comes down you shouldn't be doing any podcasts, then that'd be a different discussion for me. I got to be honest with you, because I do like this. This is a form of therapy for me. I like to be creative about it, and it would be it would suck to close the opportunity, right? I don't think I ever have a shot of getting into SAG-AFTRA as an actor. I think that that moment in my life was presented to me, and I passed on it. And I'm pretty okay with that. I have to be honest with you. Sejan talks about his former life. My former life, I got to do some really great things, but then I realized that it wasn't a life. It was just a hustle. And I want to be able to sit down and just kind of enjoy the fruits of my labor, which is why I transitioned to what I transitioned to. All of that said, it would really suck if because of the Lenny report, someday down the line, I was denied access into this, right? That's pretty much the fact of it.
But like I said, there is definitely a part of it though that is this idea that they have given a lot to us and to the creation of this show. We have it's pretty foundational. The movies and television that have come out while we have been recording this have been a huge jumping off point for us to have many discussions. And if this is what it means right now is for us to take a pause on that stuff in order to pay back those artists for that, then I'm happy to do it.
And as am I. So there we go. There's the fun SAG-AFTRA portion of this very different episode of the SayReport. It's just fun to say that. It's fun to have gone from a VSC to a VDE, though VD doesn't sound as great as it when I said it out loud like that.
All right, man.
All right. So I guess, is there anything you want to talk about that is not related to that stuff? Or, I mean, how are you feeling right now?
You said you had a whole list of stuff.
Well, I mean, the whole list of stuff I have is that, for some reason, this was a huge release for indie video games. And throughout that indie video game thing, I am sad to report that I did have my Steam account stolen from me. I am currently working with Valve to recover it.
What happened?
I clicked on a bad link. I going through things. One of the links I clicked on led to a fake page. Steam? No, not on Steam.
Oh,
from the internet, and then I thought it connected me to Steam, but it didn't. It was one of those. It reminds me of. Wow! I almost fucking referenced something to explain it. It's like a trap card from Yu-Gi-Oh!
Nice. Okay, yeah.
So it looked like it was normal, but then once I entered some information and clicked the button, it disguised itself as Steam and then took all my information. And I'm working
man.
immediately once I realized what had happened, because I got a letter back in a different language from Valve proper. I'm like, oh no, damn it, I'm an idiot. So
Well, I'm
that's
sorry
fun.
that happened.
Yeah.
What were you attempting to purchase at the time?
I was trying to get more information about the Counter-Strike sequel, to be completely honest. And I wasn't even like going to buy it. I was just trying to get information about it, because there was a big drop of information this weekend that I guess it turns out was just like a huge phishing scam, and like slant interest screwed me over.
Yeah. Man, that's a fucking bummer. I'm so sorry. Man.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly is going to make me more like now I wonder about some of the beta stuff that I signed up for that I was like convinced was through Namco, if it was actually through Namco. It's kind of just been like a thing. But let's go back to the independent video games that have released this week, because that's more fun. That's how I'm going to put it. You had a new beat 'em up in the Double Dragon series, Double Dragon Gaiden Rise of the Dragons.
Nice.
Which, I'm going to be honest with you, right before we started recording, I finally finished a run-through of the game. I got through and saw the ending. And that game could be the future of beat 'em ups. If. And it's a pretty big if. First of all, right now it is only couch co-op, which I kind of understand. I think everybody is afraid of how good Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles co-op was. And they don't know how.
They don't want to slip it up, so they're just not even bothering to try.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. It's a fucking bummer.
It is a real bummer, especially when we get to the other game that we talked about that released this week that for a brief discussion. So if this game had online co-op, I could forgive a lot of the issues that I have experienced with it. Mm-hmm. But here's a fun thing. Playing Double Dragon Gaiden and having the complaint that like platforming in a beat 'em up always feels kind of out of place. I was curious about when it added into the Double Dragon series is there from the very first arcade game. So the platforming in Double Dragon, it's always been there, for better or for worse. I will say that.
Like, how much platforming are we talking about, though? Like, just the ability to jump on top of cars, or like, are we talking about like having different ways to get through levels because you can go one way as opposed to another?
I'm talking stage progression requiring you platforming in order to move forward.
Okay.
So
okay.
like it's not like
interstitial moments where you got to like jump up windows and shit like that.
Yeah. In the very first level of the arcade game, which was enough for me to say, okay, platforming is this. I don't know if it's to the extent that you see in like the NES game. My question was if they added the platforming to the NES versions of Double Dragon, because Mario, sort of the big seller in America, is a platformer. So to try to make it more appealing to all those people who bought the NES for Mario, they got some platformer in my beat 'em up. But no, that's not the case. But the big difference being that Double Dragon in the arcade has a dedicated jump button.
Right.
Where on the NES, in order to jump for these platforming sections that, again, do exist in the arcade version, you have to hit the B and A button at the same time. And it needs to be simultaneous frame perfect. Otherwise, you're going to kick or you're going to punch, and you're then also going to fall into the pit you were walking towards to try to clear. So,
right.
like, there's a whole other, it brings a whole other meaning to NES Hard, unfortunately. Is that these two buttons have to do 3 movements. And
so I'm gathering that means that there's platforming in the new one?
There is platforming in the new one, but gosh. So one of the reasons why the platforming is not good in the original arcade Double Dragon is, you know, you walk forward until you get to a screen, and you're stuck on that screen until you beat all of the bad guys. In an ideal world, in a well-designed sort of game like that, you would never have to fight people in an area that has platforms, right? That's not the case in Double Dragon, the original arcade game. There are moments where, like, you'll be standing on the bottom and they're, like, on the part that's 2 jumps up. so like 2 levels higher, and they won't come down to you. And then when you go try to move forward to them, the camera is still the fixed screen view that you have. But then also when you try to jump up, they'll attack you. They basically have the high ground, which is the strategic, like, best place to be. And there's no way for you to deal with that. It just kind of feels like cheap game design to get the person to pump in more quarters.
But yeah, so to be clear, this is the original Double Dragon.
This is the original. What the new game has is those same sort of sections, but in the room, you might be going up and down at the same time, and there are pits, and there are traps, and there's all sorts of ways that you can get hurt. And a trap will do, like 10 damage to you if you step on a spike pit. If you fall in a hole, you lose 20 HP, and you get randomly reset to another section on the board. You don't get reset to like a safe place. They could drop you in the middle of enemies. So the level where this is like the worst is for the Okada gang, because their first section, you break into a casino, but then you have to climb a mountain. And so in addition to everything else that I just talked platform-wise, there's like depth levels to the platforms. So you'll jump up over a platform and then you'll fall behind it so you can't see your person.
Nope.
And just like the way that it is built, the level design feels like more of a problem. Now again, Double Dragon level design has always kind of been a fuck you moment, but it's just disappointing that in 2023, especially after something like Double Dragon 4 that came out, I think that was 2017, but don't quote me on it. It was a while ago. And
right.
but they avoided all of the platforming that kind of felt like Double Dragon bullshit platforming.
Yeah, wasn't Double Dragon 4 one of those ones that was like kind of well received, but at the same time a lot of old school fans were like, this just doesn't feel like the same game anymore, man. Like that kind of thing. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, that is because it was released for modern it was designed and built for modern platforms. And part of what that meant was you had a dedicated jump button with NES style graphics. Mm-hmm. So like, oh, it's real easy to do the jumps now. And it's like, that's a weird thing to complain about. Because like...
well, but then to then turn around and also then not do too much of that, right? Like,
right.
It's a weird double move.
There are still moments of it, but also it's not like... The one that I always think of in the original NES Double Dragon is jumping onto a moving log, and it's just a bear to do that. So there's no moments where like you're jumping onto a moving platform, but there are moments where you're jumping onto appearing platforms that are over water, and if you don't do it right, then you'll fall into the water and lose a life.
Okay.
So it's there, but also, I mean, having a dedicated jump button really does change how that game plays.
I mean, I can imagine, yeah.
Yeah. And again, like that was how it was designed for arcades. So, and then I think another reason why a lot of people didn't like Double Dragon 4 is the final boss you fought too. They were kind of like die staff counterparts of Billy and Jimmy, and they used guns, and those guns would kill you with one hit.
Whoa.
So,
okay.
So it was one of those situations where you could play through the whole game and then like bullshit final boss. And, like, not bullshit final boss the way that, like, Machine Gun Willie feels like in the original Double Dragon. Because if he shoots you, it hurts you a lot, but it's not necessarily you're done.
Auto-death. Yeah, right.
Or, like, the fact that you have to avoid a bunch of bullets and you'll have only a very small time to hurt him. It is just the fact that, boop, and you're done.
Yeah, it's a weird choice to make when you're not also looking for quarters from kids too, right? Like if you're not having kids actively pump in a bunch of money in order to, because that's one of the big things about Machine Gun Willie, right? Is you can keep pumping money in, right? And you can finally win that one. But if it's like an auto death and you're not on an arcade machine, like it just like the choice seems just like a fuck you and nothing else.
Yeah. And so I think that might be the issue too. I think the other big issue that people had with Double Dragon 4 is Double Dragon Neon had come out before it. And Double Dragon Neon, like, was over the top 80s action and, still felt like Double Dragon, but also while being this crazy game where like you fought a Mega Man XP, and it had like musical numbers, and the villain was like a Skeletor who talked like Skeletor, and it was like fun, and it was like over the top,
fun,
campy,
like, meta,
yeah,
like look at Double Dragon as a whole, and then to go back into a more grounded Double Dragon, more grounded as much as it can be, but like a more grounded Double Dragon, and have it have a bunch of just kind of off-putting choices. I thought, yeah, because like Double Dragon 4 is one of those ones that, I don't know, I'm not a big Double Dragon guy, and I got my hands on it, and it just felt like Double Dragon to me. But then, like, you talk to people about it, and they talk about all the reasons why it just wasn't Double Dragon. And it's interesting because we've always talked about the ways that nostalgia really, taints a lot of things, and so to see that there's still people out there that still want Double Dragon in some fashion, but like we're talking about this idea that technology's come so far, you can't really capture that without really, without putting some really dumb limitations on things that we don't like in games. Like, you can't really recapture the magic. Double Dragon was fun because it was able to pull off some amazing shit with so many constraints. Without those constraints anymore, I don't know if Double Dragon's ever going to be as magical.
Right. And that's an interesting thing you say about the constraints, because while leveled platforming, moving into the background and to the foreground with pits that like can just sort of stun lock you to death is certainly not good, the limitations of this game are really strange to me. For example, Billy can only use kicks. His whole fighting style is kicks. He will never throw a punch. Jimmy only uses punches. And so weirdly, neither one of them feels fully Double Dragon-y. Because the beauty of Double Dragon when it first came out is that you have a punch and you have a kick. And you get to put those together to make cool combos that will deal the most damage to the enemies.
In ways that you see fit, right? Like there's like branching types of combos that you can do in order to get some really cool damage done. And if you're more of a kick-based person, because you can get that timing a little bit better, or literally just because where the button is placed, then, that's the kind of fighter you are. This is weird that it like forces you into one or the other.
Yeah. And then, so from the beginning, there's 4 characters available. So you have Billy and Jimmy. Then you have Marion, which one of the reasons why I really wanted to play this game was this is the second time that Marion has been playable in a game, because she was a playable character in River City Girls 2, and by all accounts from the creators, it is meant to be the Marion from the Double Dragon games. It's the second time that she's playable, but in Double Dragon Gaiden, she is a weapons user. She uses a pistol. She does not throw any punches. So it's interesting to have like this long distance range character there, but also she's using a gun, and we just talked about it being a one-hit kill in Double Dragon 4. Every bullet does 2 damage. So it feels a little weird.
Non-lethal bullets, I think.
Yeah, right? I'm shooting them with beanbags. It doesn't feel satisfying to use the gun.
Is there any type of like upgrade system where like you can get that number up?
So you have the upgrade system where like you can make your combo stuff and things more effective. Honestly, I haven't really been playing with it that much. I did it in my full playthrough, but because at the end of each game you're given the tokens to buy things in the shop, like unlock new characters and things, I hadn't been buying any of the upgrades. But even then, the upgrades that I got in my playthrough where I beat the game, like, your combos are more effective. Like, I had a red aura when I used combo attacks. It didn't feel like I was doing any more damage or anything like that. So I don't know. I didn't see the numbers go up in my damage scale. Like, especially, like, I upgraded the Dragon Claw attack that Jimmy has, which is he'll run forward just throwing punches. And I'm like, yeah, that seems to be doing the same amount of damage it was doing before.
Weird.
Because in addition, like, well, I want to finish with the characters and then talk about the additional thing about Double Dragon Gaiden, where like it would be amazing. It would be the next evolutionary step in beat 'em up games if we're still on the ifs of it. The final character that you have available from the beginning is Uncle Martin, and he is like a special forces soldier with a riot shield on his back. He is also older than them. He also kind of feels a little bit like Chef from that show by Trey Parker and Matt Stone.
Okay.
And as whenever he takes over, he goes, "Get behind me, children." And I'm just like, okay, that was a choice. That was an interesting choice that you made there. But he's the only character in the game who feels like a beat 'em up character because he uses both punches and kicks in his fighting style.
Nice.
And he kind of feels
but it's not that like these other buttons are just now useless, right? Like there are moves on all buttons. It's just that they're all punch moves or all.
So you only have. So the way that your attacks are laid out is you have your attack button, which is like the west button. We're going to do it that way, right? So your west button is attack, your south button is jump, your east button is grab or action. So like it's like a living move. For the double dragons, they grab them and then they can do like throws and things. For Uncle Martin, he will pick up the character and then so he can throw them that way, or he can jump and do like a power bomb. He really kind of feels like Hagar from Final Fight or Max from Streets of Rage, where he's more of like a wrestling style fighter. But it's
he's a
weird.
brawler.
Yeah, he's a brawler. Yeah. I didn't know if that was the term for it because they all kind of seem like brawlers, but I guess the Double Dragons are karate fighters, martial artists.
Yeah, they've got a lot more focus on what they do.
Yeah. And it's weird that he's the only character who kind of feels like an actual character in a fighting game where you're seeing punch, punch, kick as his combo as opposed to kick, kick, kick. And also the kick is the same distance as the punch. Another thing in Double Dragon is like you use the kick because it has more distance, but if you miss, it's a longer time before you recover. Where the punch, it's short distance, but it's fast recovery. Like all of that's taken out of it, so it's less Double Dragon that way. And then you can unlock a bunch of characters who are villains you fight in the game, but also all of them, like a Bobo, all he does is punch. So it just like none of them feel like fully realized characters, and that's something that's kind of disappointing to me. The fact that like all these characters to unlock, oh, that's fun, but none of the characters to unlock are like fun to play as.
Right.
So it's like at the end of the day, I'm just going to keep using Uncle Martin and Jimmy because that's like my style of play. That makes sense to me. Also, it has a revive system that is very similar to like pumping quarters into the game, where your score, it takes money away from your score to bring you back. So then it's less rewards at the end of it. It's interesting. But then every time you beat a level, the levels get bigger. Like it goes from being a one zone area to there being 2 sections in the zone to eventually being 3 sections in the zone. And like that's interesting, but as the levels get longer, they all tend to have those like weird platforming sections that just do not feel fun at all.
Man. I mean, it sounds like a real bummer of a game, Dave.
Yeah, as I'm talking about it and thinking it, like, I'm glad I beat it. I will probably try to beat it at least 3 more times because there are 4 separate endings. Well, there's 2 separate endings, but there's 4 separate, like, break into 4 moments. Depending on which gang you defeat last.
Oh yeah. I see what you mean.
Yeah.
That changes. I thought you meant like it kept. I thought you meant it like Lord of the Rings did, and every time you thought it was over, it was just another.
No, so you have the 4 gangs that you need to beat, and then whichever order you do those gangs in the last one, the boss is unique in that fight, as opposed to the other 3 times you can fight them. Like for Machine Gun Willie, he's in the helicopter. So, like, he's shooting from the helicopter and you need to knock him out of the helicopter and then do damage and you're on the top of a roof. So, like, you want to make sure you keep him on the roof because if you knock him off the roof, he'll only take that 20 damage, but then he'll get picked up by the helicopter again. So you have to start from the beginning where he has like a significant advantage over you. And that's the only one that I've done. So I want to see the unique like final fight for all of these characters. But it's an interesting experience. But the way that like the problem with beat 'em up games is that they're very repetitive. That's the complaint that a lot of people have about them. This game, by its very nature of like growing and changing each time that you like play through, you might not have the same mini boss, even if you do like Machine Gun Willie's tower as the second level each time.
Mm-hmm.
So like it's a cool way to add replayability, and the fact that whoever your fourth gang is, it's a unique experience right down to the boss fight. Like they kind of gave me 4 games for half the price of one, because it was $30. And that's cool. I just don't know if it has enough like legs to keep me playing it to do all 4 of them.
That is, yeah. I mean, that sounds really disappointing. I guess I don't know why I'm too surprised after I talked about how I kind of encountered Double Dragon 4. I think the big thing is that Double Dragon Neon has really kind of taken over the Double Dragon like narrative over the last 5 years or whatever it's been, right? Like, and so all I've heard is just the love for that game and how that game was willing to get goofy and all that. And in a lot of ways, when the new Turtles came out and it had, you know, all of this really cool stuff that was referential and funny and jokey, but also was like, you know, really good just Turtles gameplay. It feels like there is definitely a line of successful beat 'em ups that you can keep following, but they don't seem to it doesn't seem to be like reinvigorating the genre in the way that you would have thought by now, you know, because even when you talk about stuff like River City Girls, where like there was a lot of love for that series up front and there was a lot of praise even on this very show for that series up front, but over the years like that series has just seemingly gone off the rails itself too. So like I just don't know why somebody like why it seems to be like a 9-to-1 hit rate on beat 'em ups, which is like pretty quintessential genre to the whole like concept of video games.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of the issue is the fact that like they didn't know how to make the transition from arcade to console. In the fact that
but
like
that was like 30 years ago.
I know,
like,
but they still
can't keep using that excuse.
But I still think they're wrestling with it. Do you remember when the X-Men game came to like PlayStation 3 and the Simpsons game, like the 2 Konami beat 'em ups came to the PlayStation 3 and everybody was like really excited because like I can an Xbox too. Yeah.
Xbox 360, yeah.
Yeah. Like those games, oh my god, these games that I love in the arcade, I can finally play them at home. But they all came with infinite continues. So people were like, well, this isn't fun if I could just keep playing and continuing. Like, where's the challenge? So, like, there's this weird, like, thing that hasn't been figured out in transitioning the beat-em-up genre from a game in the arcades that is literally designed to take your quarters from you to an at-home experience. Like, River City Ransom is one that I think of that like, did a really cool thing. But the way that they did that is they added a bunch of RPG elements to it.
Right.
And so, like, that's divisive right there. Like,
but I think one of the biggest things about doing things in the arcade setting that you lose in the home setting is an audience, right? That idea being that like you could be watching people playing these games, or you could be up next to play these games. And I think that exact problem was solved by something like Turtles when they figured out how to do this like 6-player online thing. And this idea that you could hit up your friends and say, hey, I'm playing right now with these guys, but if you want next, we'll be done soon. Which feels like that's something straight out of the arcade. Like, go grab a soda and a slice and like be back, and by the time you get back, I'm sure we will have lost. Like, and then you can get in next, right? Like that whole community atmosphere of the arcade, that made beat 'em up games feel like something special and unique, was lost in coming to the home console because you didn't have that out in public anymore. But we've regained that sense with online play, and I just can't believe we haven't seen more make these bigger attempts at this online community playing these games, because like that's to me a huge part of the experience with them.
Yeah, you're not wrong. It is Turtles works, and even like Mortal Kombat, the fact that they have those rooms that you can go into where you're watching people fight and then you are in line to play the winner, like that's a really cool thing that emulates the arcade experience.
Well, right, and I think that's part of the reason why the beat 'em up stuff really confounds me so much is how well the fighting game, a separate genre but still, conceptually in the same realm, like fighting games have done gangbusters on console. So like, why have we not seen that for beat 'em ups as well?
Yeah, I don't know. I just think it's one of those genres that it hasn't ever really truly hit on the console market, but every time that it does, it feels like a fluke because other people try to recreate it and then ultimately don't see that same success. So it becomes more of a risk than people want to take. And it's a shame because like this one with the evolving levels and the fact that the way that the game changes itself and kind of randomizes what your encounters will be, that's really cool. That addresses the problem of beat 'em ups that like it always feels the same. The game always feels the same to me.
Right.
And it's like that's a good way to address that problem. And it sucks that it can't be in a game where if you play alone, you have to control the two characters, or if co-op, it's everybody gets to control their own character. If you had that online element and it was something like that, I really think that this would be getting more attention and it would soar. Like it's a bit of a disappointment. I'm not going to lie. Cause they tried something and ultimately it failed. And I am just going to say, since you brought it up, River City Girls for me, like the reason it was getting that praise is because it felt like a spiritual successor to Double Dragon Neon, where now it's being metatextual about 90s beat 'em up games.
Right.
In the way that Double Dragon Neon was about 80s beat 'em up games and the genre. And they were both by Way Forward, right? So like obviously you can see some sort of like production aspect to the way that they're building those games.
Yeah.
But no, if we keep seeing stuff like this, I think that the beat 'em up may die, and that makes me really sad because I do enjoy them. It's a genre I personally enjoy, and I'm wicked excited for the Shredder's Revenge DLC, which also seems to be taking a way of making the game more randomized with the portal stuff.
Yeah, the portal system that they're introducing, I love that they're adding some new characters. I mean, again, they're doing right by the audience in a way that no other game in this genre seems to be able to right now. So.
Yeah. I mean, Streets of Rage 4, a lot of the stuff they're doing with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Shredder's Revenge, is built on the things that they were able to do with Streets of Rage 4. But it's just that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is a much more recognizable brand.
Well, I was gonna say, I think that the thing that the Turtles brings to it is that kind of like nostalgia and fun love that like I could play Turtles with anybody in my family and they would have a good time even if they weren't good at like playing the game, whatever that means. They would still be having fun hanging out and playing it. I couldn't do that with something like Streets of Rage. You know what I mean? Like the people would just turn themselves off to that.
Well, and even like Dale and I who go through beat 'em ups together, Streets of Rage 4, that first time we played through the story mode, like it got to the point where she's like, I think I'm done with this. I'm like, we're in the last level. It said final mission. Like, I'd really like to try to finish, but I understand where you're coming from. I understand how like the fatigue of this game could have set in because there's nothing, all of the nostalgia part of this game we've already passed. Now we're facing new characters and chasing new characters. So like the fun has kind of gone away. That part of the fun has gone away.
Yeah.
Which brings me to the other big like indie game that came out this week. I struggle to say indie game, but I don't know the company that made it at all. But it's with one of the most recognizable groups of characters in the like entertainment realm. Mm-hmm. Which is Illusion Island.
Yeah.
Which is like Rayman Legends, but
I actually believe it's Disney Illusion Island is the full name. Not even Disney's Illusion Island or something like that. Just Disney Illusion Island.
Okay.
No, like if you look it up on your
I'm
Switch,
looking it
make
up right
sure
now.
you
Yeah,
say Disney, or else yeah,
yeah,
like
it is
it's
Disney
filed
Illusion
under D.
Island. Good. I'm glad we looked that up. I'll need that for like the tags later. It was developed by Diala Studios. Is it Diala or is it D La La? It's D La La Studios.
Is that
And if you look at our games, they were responsible for the Battletoads remake, and now they're doing Disney Illusion Island.
okay?
So that's all D La La has done, which is cool. There's no issue with that, but it's just, yeah.
Are they a studio? Do you know much about them? Like, are they
Well, I'm
created
looking
by
at
Disney
them.
or something like that? Like,
It doesn't look like they're owned by Disney because of the Battletoads of it. Let's see. Making games we love with people we love for people to love. D La La Studios has been around for 10 years. They've spent the past decade focused on creativity, technical knowledge, and producing high-quality, passion-driven work. It is this drive that we've seen work with established franchises and support some of the biggest companies across the globe. We've developed and shipped titles on Microsoft, Sony, Google, Apple, and Linux platforms, as well as a number of web-based applications and games. And they were considered a best place to work in 2022 UK.
I mean, that's pretty rad considering
Yeah.
some of these games and gaming companies.
Oh,
I mean,
they
no,
work
cool,
with
like,
Sea of Thieves too. That's a
oh,
client game. Be More
well,
Pirate.
and that makes sense because that's rare, and
Yep.
and
Battletoads.
Battletoads is rare as well. So having that relationship there, also rare as a huge video game company in the UK. Like, so all of that makes sense. I mean, it's just cool. It's cool to see a company that you're not too familiar with getting their hands on something, and by all accounts, doing pretty well with it. I know it only just came out, and I only know a couple of people that are playing it currently. I have not picked it up because, again, no online multiplayer. So I'm waiting for the family to be around for us to actually buy it and play it, because this is very much a game I want to play with other people. I cannot believe that they did not figure out a way to get online. Maybe it'll come later, but it's not there now.
Yeah. I don't know. And maybe it's because it's like this smaller company that put it together. But also, if
Yeah.
it's the best place to work, then they're not going to be crunching to develop an online mode. And I think, I don't know, games have like second lives now. We talk about that a lot, and then we usually point at No Man's Sky. But this game being released as it is now, people will play it. Some people will stream it. There'll be a taste for it in the water. And then if they do an online version, let's say close to Christmas, right? It's still July. That's 5 months out. It could have a whole reinvigorated life once there's an online component to it.
If they aim for anything, they should aim for like mid-November, so that
Yeah.
like you get people on that like Black Friday sale. You can say buy it now; it's got online and all that, and then you get a good month's worth of stuff before the big Christmas buys.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like it's the only thing that's really stopped me so far, because other than that, like I'm super excited to jump in on this. I mean, you invoked Rayman Legends earlier, and like that was kind of the last big like team platformer that I had a group of people around me that we really dug into. You know, like there was always Mario's and stuff that me and the guys will go back to like on our off days. But as far as like sitting down, starting to play, and saying we need to keep meeting up so that we can be the ones to finish this game together, this is kind of the first one that I've had in a while. And so like in that, I'm super excited to play it. I just, like I said, just the second I saw there was no online element to it, so that meant that team wasn't going to include you, wasn't going to include Dale, wasn't going to include Zach. So I was just like, all right, I guess I can hold off until I have a group of people around me that I can talk to more about this.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I picked it up because it has a physical release. So after trying to get a physical release of Double Dragon Gaiden, I believe I got the only copy that was sent to New England. That can't be true, but the work that I had to do to find a copy in a store was more than I was like prepared to do. I thought that I would, on release date, look it up and be like, it's available at this Target. And even if I have to travel like 50 miles to that Target, I can get a physical copy on release day. But it went from pre-order to not sold in stores on the Target website. And then I looked on Best Buy, and it was the same for everything except for one location that had, quote, limited stock. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to roll the die on this one and see what happens. So I got Double Dragon Gaiden, and then for Illusion Island, I was there resetting the page as soon as it clicked over to when it would be available, and I found a copy at my local Target, and I'm like, I'm just buying it. I haven't played the game yet. I don't know if it's going to have the online, because it felt like it wasn't going to have online, but I was still holding out a little bit of hope that on release we would find out that it did. And no, it just doesn't. So yeah.
I mean, so if you haven't even opened it yet, so there's not
I
too
have
much
not
you can
opened
say
it.
about
No, I can't say
Okay.
anything about it. I can say that a listener of the show, friend of the show, let me borrow Street Fighter 6, Mark. His kids have been playing it, and they have enjoyed their time with it. Though I do think it resulted in a broken Joy-Con at the house, because he showed me a picture. He's like, I don't know what happened. I'm like, that kind of looks like Throne Controller Syndrome. So I don't want to say it, but platformers. We were all young and platforming once.
We all know the rage.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I am really excited to sit down and play it. I mean, and then like tying it into the illusion, the Castle of Illusion stories and stuff like that. Like, I'm so curious to see if there's much of a pull there. Like other than just like a name and a couple of like places. Because I don't know. I love that game, right? Like Mickey, and I think that one's called Mickey's Castle of Illusion, isn't it?
So I mean, it's a whole series of games.
Right. But
Like,
but so I have some love for those games, and plus I think that they're highly referenced in a lot of various cartoons over the years because there's been so many different iterations of Disney and his gang now that they've been able to touch on that stuff more than once. So like that's a cool thing for them to tie to. I don't know how it benefits them in any way. I mean, I don't know if maybe they're hoping to maybe see if they can redo something with Castle of Illusion. I don't know. It's a weird thing for them to invoke without any other like thing, right? Um, God, imagine if they do like a TV show or a movie that's like Castle of Illusion based in some way. That would be cool.
yeah, Castle of Illusion, Land of Illusion, Legend of Illusion, all the illusion stuff. They are the games where like, yeah, it's Mickey, but it's not easy. Like, these are
Yeah.
difficult games.
Right.
So
Well, I mean, they were the hardcore like games, right? Like,
yeah,
and Disney wasn't doing that for a while.
yeah.
That's the other reason why I'm excited is that like this feels like them like Disney, they did this weird thing where they said they were pulling out of video games, but they never really quite did, right? Because I mean, first of all, there's the Kingdom Hearts stuff. But they've also had a racing game out there for a while, right? Like there's a couple of different series that Disney has quietly kept going after being so public about how they were closing down all their video game stuff. That's still not great. Like they still definitely closed a bunch of studios that didn't need to be closed and really like cut stuff off that in really unfortunate ways here and there. But like the ways in which they have actually kind of not gotten out of video games has been wild to watch. And so seeing them come back to this style of game, and I hope that it is got some difficulty levels to it, some difficult levels to it, because that you're right, that is what kind of made those games. Obviously, I don't want it to be unplayable, and I think by the fact that there's 4 people allowed on screen at a time, definitely gives you the impression that there's going to be some sillier ways that you can deal with some more problematic circumstances in this game, as opposed to in the past when it was just one player, right? Um, I'm so intrigued by the whole thing, and I'm really happy that it exists. I just need some friends to play it with me.
Yeah. I gotta tell you, looking at it, the levels are all references to classic shorts, and it looks like there's like 20 levels,
Yeah,
which seems like a lot more content than I was expecting. Because the thing that I always think about with the Illusion games is that they were fun, they were difficult, but they were short. So I'm excited to jump into it.
Yeah.
Now that I finally got a clear of Double Dragon Gaiden, I'll probably open it up and see if Dale and I can get in there. And I don't know if we can convince anyone else in the house to play, but we'll see what happens with it. I mean, the other thing is I was hoping to hang out with people to play these 2 co-op games, but COVID reared its ugly head again, and plans had to be modified. So it's just an unfortunate thing.
yeah. No, I mean, I am I am trying to think of if there's anything indie that I've been doing lately in the video game realm. I mean, I've been diving real deep into Dome Keeper, which has been a fucking blast. But that's actually kind of old news at this point in the streaming realm, at least. It's got all of the best parts of SteamWorld Dig with like this whole added element of this defense like build that you're doing, essentially like wave format, like getting attacked by a bunch of monsters, and you have to build up your defenses on your dome to keep it going. And the way that you do that is you between rounds you're digging for ore and stuff beneath your dome, right? And like it's addictive as hell. The ways in which you can unlock more permanent upgrades and things like that, and different styles of dome. I just unlocked a style where you start out with a gun that you can shift around, a laser gun that you can shift around to shoot the monsters, right? But now I've unlocked one that's just a giant sword, and you just swing it around your dome and just attack things, which means that you're going to take more damage just by the nature that it's going to take, some things are going to get close and do what they do, but you can then beef up your defenses like crazy and the power of that sword, and the next thing you know, you're shooting that sword off into space. It's crazy. And like that is all late game stuff for me, because like I spent 20 hours just playing with the normal dome at first, unlocking other stuff instead, but like the progression in that game has got me hooked. So like that's probably the closest thing, but again, that game's been out for a while now, so it's kind of old news for people.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I have to get my Steam account back before I can look into anything like that. But yeah, where are you with Street Fighter 6? Are you still touching
I
it,
dip
or
into it from time to time, but I
okay?
am not like playing it seriously. Why?
Okay.
What would?
I finished the World Tour mode,
Yeah.
and again, I'm having a real issue with final bosses, Siegen,
Yes.
because that final mission was disappointing.
No, I
And
mean that's a tale as old as time with games, though, right?
yeah,
Like, there's very few good final bosses. There's very few games that could pull off bosses in general. It's what made games like Link to the Past and stuff like that like such big hits back in the day, is when they had a good boss set up. Like that was huge for people. Most of the time, it was just fly around and shoot the red dot. But think about the games like Cuphead that then capitalize on that. Like
yeah,
they sold themselves as a game just full of good boss battles. Um, it's not always a guarantee in these games.
yeah.
So I appreciate that you're not finding what you want from these, and unfortunately I think that's just kind of par for the course with gaming.
Yeah, I guess maybe I had been finding ones that were just like, if it's not going to be a crazy engaging or reinvent the wheel final boss fight, I at least want it to be satisfying. And I've been having a distinct like pattern of games not having a satisfying conclusion. Be it the boss fight is not great or the final mission objective is not great. So I'm really hoping to break that curse, is what I'm going to say. Because I feel like it's me who has been cursed to play all of these like lackluster games. So, just that. But I was curious if you were dipping into that. Where are you in World Tour? Like, do you know what chapter you're in or anything like that off the top of your head?
Tell you
Okay.
no, because they do that weird thing where I've been like leveling up and going through stuff, but then I realize what I've been leveling is just my master as opposed to the story, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
No, my focus has, in terms of any big game stuff over the last couple of weeks, my focus has completely shifted over to the release of the Ruin DLC for Five Nights at Freddy's. So,
Which makes sense.
like, I've just been like playing a lot of that, and feel like every time I feel like there's more, like I've not hit a point where I feel like it should have ended, and man, it just keeps going. It's one of those things where I can't really believe there is as much to this as I was convinced it was going to be like a 5 hour, 6 hour experience. I'm 10 hours in, and I don't think I'm near what I would call an end. Who knows? I could turn a corner and it could just end instantly, and I could talk about how it was a disappointing ending, but like I don't think I'm there yet. It's really hard to talk about this DLC without getting into like the whole like history of the games in general, but let me put it this way: it's not like anything you've ever done in these games before. It's a lot more on rails. It's a lot more. It feels more like a like a haunted house ride. There's a lot of moments where I don't where I feel like I'm in danger for a moment, but then kind of instantly realize I'm really not in any danger. You know, like characters that could hurt me, like jumping at you, but then you realize, oh, they're leashed in some way, whether it's a there's a fence in their way, or they're just not going to come any further. That being said, there's been straight up moments where I've gotten like cheap killed, like where I feel like that I got killed in a way that shouldn't have happened, but okay, fine game. Like there's been that sort of stuff too. Like it's it feels like I hesitate to say that it feels like it's easier than any of the other games, but by its very nature, the kind of game that it is, the much more on rails forward nature, like straight up, you will walk through a door and then like the ceiling will collapse behind you, so there's no going back through that door. So it's like, okay, guess I hope I got everything done there that I meant to get done because I am not going back. By that, but like with that whole thing, like it's nothing like the original security breach, which it's the DLC for, because that was like this whole open thing there where I caught myself kind of running around doing all sorts of dopey shit, and then that going to places I didn't really need to go, and subsequently dying because I was in places I shouldn't necessarily be in moments and things like that. But like none of that with this time around. And then compared to the old games where you literally there's no walking around at all, like there's some haunted house elements that they've kind of reintroduced from that, which I think is really cool. Like there's a lot of jump scares that aren't necessarily like deaths, right? Which I think a lot of people often mistakenly associate the idea that jump scares in Five Nights at Freddy's would mean that like, oh, you have to restart. That has not always actually been the case. There've actually always been a really cool balance of certain types of things that'll happen that will catch you off guard, freak you out, and throw you off, but you're not dead yet. And it's like the old like Mario Kart problem of shit. I thought we were on lap 3, where like you'll get a jump scare in one of those games and you'll be like, fuck me, that scared the shit out of me. And then you'll realize that you haven't been paying attention to this mechanic for 2 minutes because you've been recovering from that jump scare, and you're like, oh, I might have screwed myself because I haven't been paying attention now, which is part of the game, right? It's not with the DLC for this, and like I hesitate now to really talk about it as just a DLC because it really does feel like this huge kind of expansion of add-on that they've created here. Like it it introduces that sort of jump scare element, but with none of the danger after a while. Like I really do feel pretty safe pretty often in this story. But I think that that's okay because I'm actually kind of super into some of the like narrative shit that's happening. There's like all of this stuff about VR and AR like getting in the way of the real world and what's real and what's not, and like there's some really wild sci-fi like horror elements to this game that again has not always been present in this series, and it's actually kind of cool to see it introduced. It's like any horror franchise when you get to the 10th movie. By this point, things have gotten so ridiculous. We've gone to space. We like anything is possible. Like at this point, it's just about like what are some good, cool, nostalgic elements to the series we can bring around, and what are some cool new things we can do, and can we balance the two? And I think it does a phenomenal job of that. The funny part to me is just that like I feel like this is what the main game Security Breach in essence, like the meta of what the game was trying to do, that it never quite pulled off for anybody. um even I who really like that game have to admit that like that game is not a horror game and does not do the franchise any favors. This add-on, this DLC, feels so much more like what I kind of expected to feel from the main game. Like I feel like there is definitely some weird story stuff that's being dropped to me piece by piece. I feel like there's some cool stuff that if I was paying attention, like I could maybe actually get different endings and things like that. Like there's all of the stuff that I feel with the old games that was just absent from Security Breach is now here in this DLC, and I don't know if anybody's going to really latch onto this DLC if they didn't buy into Security Breach, for not least of which because you need to own that game. Literally, you need to buy in order to get to this DLC. It's really weird. It reminds me a lot of the feelings I have about Minerva's Den, the BioShock 2 DLC. That is like this phenomenal distillation of what everything is great about BioShock into like a 6 hour experience. And like the idea that you could distill that entire kind of feeling down, the upgrade concepts, the weapon concepts, the scary concepts, all like even the narrative concepts of the ways in which that's this whole thing about an African American computer scientist who has been brought down to to Rapture and like what his experiences are like in this world, this like dystopian Ayn Rand-esque world, like really really interesting politics that scary story talks about, right? Like everything that is great about BioShock, all boiled down into this 6 to 10 hour experience that you have. And I think that if I were to ever tell anybody to play BioShock again, I would just say to them, just play Minerva's Den, because one of the things they did is they actually broke it out as a separate thing that you can purchase, I think, through like the somehow through like the greatest hits thing that they did, where they like revamped them all. They actually, I think, at some point made Minerva's Den its own separate buyable experience. Just buy that and just play that and you'll get it. Like don't bother with the 30 hours you need to spend in the first game, the 50 hours you could spend in the second game, because it all amounts to a bunch of just questions and head scratching. Play this tighter experience and you'll get why everybody loved this thing back then. And like I feel like this is going to kind of become that thing for me with this series, is that when people like are like, man, there's so much Five Nights at Freddy's, why would I ever get in on this? Now there's a movie coming out, I just want to kind of have some idea of what's going on. I would kind of point you to this DLC. As fucking bizarre as it is, and as weird and as different as it is with all the sci-fi and the AR and the VR bullshit and all this stuff, and this whole thing about like, what is real? Are you real? Are you a robot? No, who the fuck knows? Like, as much as none of that is emblematic of the whole series, the meta of it all, of this whole thing of just like, this is a thing that kids are super into, and it's been fucked by capitalism and this psychopath that's in charge of the whole thing and all of this stuff. And in that very nature, like, there is this horror story to tell. I think you can kind of get a lot of that from this. And so that's been really cool to experience, because, as I said, the main game, Security Breach, was like none of this. And so like it was kind of a letdown in that regard. So to be able to be actually find something cool in this world is cool.
Cool. I mean, that's not something I ever touched, I got to be honest with you. But I do like to hear about it from you. So thank you for sharing that with me. And I have to be honest, if I can find Minerva's Den, I might check it out. Because my chance to engage with BioShock was stolen from me. And it's difficult.
There was a point where they did I think it was on PlayStation 4, where they did the 1 and 2, the BioShock collection. It might have been all 3, but 1, 2, and 3. But then they also put out all the separate stuff. When they did that, for a while, Minerva's Den was available as its own thing. I don't know if that's still a thing or if that was just like a special at the time, but
yeah, I'll check it out. If
you can find it on its own, just play Minerva's Den.
Cool. Very cool. Because I'm looking for stuff to play. I have a backlog and I'm working through it. I mean, I am going to start Hyrule Warriors today. I'm very excited about that since I worked through everything else. But yeah, we'll see what happens. Which brings us to the end of the show, right? Is there nothing else from you, right?
I'm trying to think of too much else I've been doing. Still going crazy on Brotato. No, nothing that... nothing in the realm of what we want to talk about right now. Let me put it that way.
Fair. I almost lavish some praise on something that is essentially persona non grata right now. So yeah. I'm glad that I caught myself. But now we're going to talk about a thing. We're going to go back a little bit to the beginning of the SAG-AFTRA during this time where we're steering away from movies and television as topics. So if you go back to the very first episode of the SAG-AFTRA called Shantae Street, in that episode, we had decided on topics we wanted to discuss, and then that's what we talked about on the show before it grew into just kind of this cool hangout, any topic is fair game show that you're currently listening to. So in that vein, I have decided I have a little assignment for Sejin and for you, the listener, as a way to engage in this. If you've been listening to over the air radio, and honestly, I wouldn't forgive you if you haven't been, with Apple Music and Spotify and podcasts, a song from the 90s has found new life. And that song is Fast Car by Tracy Chapman. And initially I was like very upset about this song being covered the way that it is, because I thought that it was autobiographical. I thought it was Tracy Chapman sharing about her life. And then when I found out that no, it's just a song. It's just it's inspired by things that she saw, but it's not like the story of a real person who had such a shit life that like, we just need to get the fuck out of here as fast as possible. We'll figure it out once we get to wherever we're going. It made me less bothered by the fact that the song was being covered. But then I found out that the cover of the song, which is by Luke Combs, is the first time that the song has ever gone to number 1 in the 30 years of its existence, which was something to me. And then as I dove deeper and deeper down the fast car, like, black hole of information that's out there, I found that it's been covered like hundreds and thousands of times. So what I'm going to make Siegen do, and I'll do it myself as well, right? And you, the listener, you have a week to get this done because we're going to discuss it next episode. We're not going to discuss what we had initially said we were going to discuss for that episode for obvious reasons. But we'll still do an episode on that topic, assuming that the strike will one day come to an end with a happy outcome for all. Just bringing it back together. Siegen yelled at me about making a SAG-AFTRA promise, and it was broken, but it wasn't broken because of me. I just want that.
Yeah, they never are.
Yeah, it's true. That's very true. But what I'm going to ask Siegen to do, and you, the listener, is to listen to the Tracy Chapman version of Fast Car, the Luke Combs version of Fast Car, and then 3 cover versions of the song. There are many, many of them out there. I would recommend highly that you listen to the one by Christian Kane, Dean Devlin's little best friend there.
Or for anybody that ever watched anything in the Angel Buffy verse, our buddy there, he's one of the big bads of that show. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, well, I know that he did versions of songs on his albums that say they're related to those shows. So I think that's interesting. But yeah, Christian Kane, his version of Fast Car, like, potential spoilers, might be my favorite. I'll just say that. But I'm going to ask Siegen to listen to the bass line, listen to the one that finally made it to number 1, and then 3 additional ones, and then rank those 3 covers. So it'll be a fun thing to do. We'll get to compare lists, and it'll be going back to the topic modes of the SAG-AFTRA. Do you have one for me, Siegen? Do you have an assignment for me, or...
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So one of the big ones that I've been playing, one of the big indies that I've been playing, and I have mentioned many a time on this show, is actually coming to Switch this very week. On Thursday, on August 3rd, for $5, you could pick up Brotato.
Okay.
And I think it's time we finally look at Brotato in the shadow of Vampire Survivor and Bounty of One and other like run around shoot 'em ups that we've been playing. I think it's time that we talk about this, especially because it is getting a Switch release this very week.
All right. So Fast Cars and Brotatos next week on the SayReport. And now here's the other thing that we need to address. As of this morning, Twitter is X.
Yeah. I mean, it's been
X for a while, but they finally.
Devin's phone finally updated.
Well, no, I mean the website finally updated too, where like the bird is replaced by the X and all of those other things.
No, I mean we're also sitting here with all of the news reports about the X going up on top of the Twitter building and about how that's pissing off a bunch of people, rightly so, and all that. But sorry, keep going. Yeah.
So that's happened. So with that change. I don't. At the end of every episode of the SayReport, it's like you can reach us on Twitter. I don't want to say you can reach us on X. That just seems weird to me. And honestly, I don't know if I'm going to stay on X now that it's called X. And this is probably going to be a topic that we're exploring a lot more.
Big jumping off point. Yeah. Not because of anything, like, there's no real connotations. It's just that if this is the time where they're going to make this switch, and this is the kind of switch they're going to make, I mean, I cannot believe that he's just, like, doubled down on the generic bullshit with, like, calling them posts and reposts now. Like, that's what everything on the internet is called. Everything is a post to the internet.
Yeah, it's the whole thing is crazy, and we'll dive deep.
Expecting to ever patent or copyright or anything.
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure he's got some insane stuff. I haven't done any research into it other than the fact that, like, it's now on Apple devices. So, like, that means that, like, it's everywhere now. Because they were the big holdout because you can't have an app that's only a single letter. The title of the app needed to be 2 letters or more. So, like, the fact that he was able to get around that and they've changed that whole thing, like, it feels official now. In the weird thing, I mean, when like the largest app store in the industry finally accepts it, I just don't know. But here's what we're gonna do. Usually, it's like if you want to get in touch with us, the best way to do it is on that. If you want to get in touch with us, and I imagine that with everything that's going on and all the changes, you might, because we're also asking these topic ideas that we got. If you have a topic that you've always wanted us to discuss on the Say Report, and it is not in the realm of television or film, which we're avoiding it, we are going to stand in solidarity with the SAG-AFTRA strike, send it to us. And the best way to get in touch with us right now is to send emails to TheSayReport@gmail.com. Mm-hmm. And in fact, if you've listened to this episode all the way through to this, it would be really cool if you could send an email to us, TheSayReport@gmail.com. Just let us know you listened. It'd be good, right? Let's start a conversation. And then maybe we can figure out what we want to do in order to avoid Elon Musk's newest obsession with the letter X.
Ugh.
Yeah,
it's weird times, man.
It's very strange times, and like it's kind of forcing us to make some decisions and make some plans. So again, send us an email, TheSayReport@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you. And with that, Will, please bring us home. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Say Report with your host Devin Decker and Stephen Selwick. Please follow the guys on Twitter and Facebook by searching for The Say Report, and you can always subscribe on your podcast channel so this is delivered straight to you and you can enjoy it every week. With apologies to your mother, we'll see you next time.